Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the New Yankee Workshop. You're not going to believe this, but today we're actually going to start building a boat. Not just a little model boat, a real sailboat that we can go sailing in. Now, we found the perfect sailboat in Seattle, Washington. I'll take you there next, right here on the New Yankee Workshop.
The New Yankee Workshop features the craftsmanship of Norm Abram.
This is Lake Union in the middle of the beautiful city of Seattle, Washington, where there are more boats per capita than any city in the world. And this is the Center for Wooden Boats, a place where visitors can come and see wooden boats of historical significance, and they can even take them out for a sail. The mission is to preserve and pass on the heritage of small wooden boats. But today we're here to see a class boat called a Clancy. It's a highly refined 10-foot, 85-pound sailing dinghy, and it's built from only 29 basic parts. The designer of the boat is this man, Rich Colwin. The name of the boat, Clancy, is Rich's dog. Bob Pickett wrote a book about building the Clancy. Bob, how difficult is it to build this boat?
The boat is easy to build. It's built out of plywood and epoxy.
And about how long would it take?
Oh, 2 to 3 weeks.
How does she sail?
Fast and safe.
Now, there's a whole bunch of kids here today. What are they doing?
The kids built these boats, and they're having a race.
Well, I don't want to miss that.
Well, let's get in the committee boat and take a look.
Sounds great.
Start.
So what's happening now, Bob?
They are starting across the line. They will go down to this far buoy, sail around the buoy, and come back to the finish line here.
Yeah, this looks like fun. Well, I can tell you this, building a Clancy is a lot of fun. You should allow yourself several days to put it together. And if you decide to build one, a measure drawing is available with a materials list, and you'll hear more about that before this program ends. Now, we're going to take 2 programs to build the Clancy. The first program, I want to get to this point, have the hull just about to this stage. And in the second program, we'll finish it off, rig it, and take it for a sail. Now, we found in our research that in small boat building, just about every one requires some kind of jig to get started. You build the boat, the hull, upside down. Now, here's our jig, made up of common 2x4s with plywood gussets, all assembled with screws and glue. There's some blocks at the front with the center line of the boat, and a wood strip right here which holds this centerpiece known as a crutch. And there are also braces that keep that nice and square to the frame. There's a center mold with a notch for the keelson, and the end is cut at an angle so that I can form the sides of the hull. There's a notch back here in the crutch for the aft bulkhead, and also an angled notch for the transom of the boat. Now, all the information is in the plan to build this jig. The material that I chose for the boat is a marine-grade mahogany plywood. The sheets are not 4x8, they're 4x10, and you're going to use every inch of a 10-foot sheet for the sides of the boat. Now, I want to get started today by cutting out the forward bulkhead. Now, before we cut anything, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now let's get to that bulkhead. Now I'm ready to install the front bulkhead in the jig. And I want to make sure that the vertical center line on the bulkhead aligns with the center line of the jig. Then I'll attach it with a screw. Now for the transom, which is a piece of 1/2-inch marine plywood attached to the jig in the same manner with a couple screws. Now from a piece of 2x6 Douglas fir, I've just made the curved cut on a piece which will become the knee, and that piece goes between the transom and the keelson. Now I'm going to attach the knee to the transom with a little bit of waterproof glue and some bronze screws. I use the bronze screws so that they can take the corrosive action of the water. Now this piece of Douglas fir is for the keelson. That's the part that you see inside the boat. The front end has to be tapered to fit the shape of the bow. The next piece to mill is this stem, which attaches to the keelson. It's a piece of 1¼ inch thick fir that needs to be tapered. To taper it, I'm using my tapering jig, and I've set the angle to the correct point and adjusted the fence. The front of the stem needs to be beveled. So I've tipped my saw blade to 30 degrees and adjusted the fence. It'll take 2 passes, 1 on each side. Now I attach the stem to the keelson with a little bit of glue and another one of those bronze screws. Well, now I've clamped the keelson on top of the knee, slipped it into the notch of the back bulkhead, here into the mold, and into the front bulkhead. Because the bottom of the boat has a slight curve to it, I'm going to have to bend down the keelson and attach it to the jig with a screw. Now I want to bevel the entire bottom edge of the transom so that it's at the same angle as the keelson. Next, I want to build this dagger board case, and it has a slot in the middle of it that goes all the way through so that the dagger board can be slipped in when we go sailing. Now, the inside surfaces will not be able to be reached again, so I've prepared them by putting on 3 coats of marine varnish. The first thing I want to do is attach these 1x2 mahogany cleats with some glue and screws. Now, here's what the dagger board case will look like when it's assembled. But I want the joints between the side pieces to be waterproof. So that's where our epoxy system comes in. Epoxies are 2-part glues. There's a resin and a hardener that must be mixed in the right proportion. And I only have about 9 to 12 minutes with each batch, so I have to move fairly quickly. Now, I mix the resin and the hardener first, and then for a bonding operation, I want to add some filler until the glue is about the consistency of mayonnaise. Okay, that seems to be pretty good. Now what I want to do is just butter up the edges with a coat of the epoxy and clamp the pieces together. All right, now I can put the other side on and put some clamps. Now, you don't need too much clamping pressure with epoxy. It's just a firm grip, so these spring clamps will be plenty. Now, we'll further secure the pieces together with a few bronze screws. Well, now let's clamp it in place. Now, with a pencil taped to a dowel, I want to reach up inside and mark out the area of the keelson that has to be cut. Now, with the dagger board case removed, I can transfer my marks to the top side of the keelson. Now I've freed up the keelson and daggerboard assembly and mixed up some more epoxy, which I'm going to apply to all the bondable areas. Okay, now I got to carefully set everything back in place, clamp it, and attach the pieces with some screws. Now I want to trim the keelson so that it lines up with the bevel of the stem. Well, now we're ready to set some bottom panels, and I've applied a bead of the urethane sealant. I want to secure the bottom panels to the keelson with screws every 6 inches. Now I'm using some stainless steel ones because I ran out of ones made of bronze. Because the transom is 1/2-inch plywood, I'm able to secure the bottom with a few screws. The forward and aft bulkheads are made from 1/4-inch plywood, so I can't secure them with screws. I've squared a line from the keelson, and I'm just going to use a spot of hot glue to hold those in place. Well, I think the last thing that I'm going to do today is spend some time with my block plane, trimming the edges of the bottom so that it aligns with the center mold and both the forward and aft bulkheads. Well, as you can see, I already got started this morning, and I've put on one side, planed it even with the bottom, and rounded over the corners. Let me show you how I go about it. First, I mix up some epoxy, which I'm going to apply right along the stem. And I'm also going to put some on the edge of the transom. Now, the pot life on this epoxy is 20 minutes maximum, so I've got to move quickly. Well, now I'm ready to put the skin on. I did a dry fit a little earlier, so I know about where I want to set it. Just one screw for the moment, right at the top corner. And a spring clamp down at the bottom. Now this process is called stitching, and it's a way to secure the sides to the bottom. I just use some hot glue about every 8 or 9 inches, hold it in place until it sets, and work my way from the bow all the way to the transom. Okay, now the next task is to plane it even and round it over. Now I'm just using my block plane to put a 1/4 round radius on all the corners. Next, I want to attach the keel to the bottom of the boat with some epoxy. So I want to clean all the mating surfaces with acetone. I'm going to pour it right down the center seam, and then I'm going to spread it with my putty knife. Now the keel is a piece of Douglas fir. It's tapered at the front, and it has a hole in it for the daggerboard. I formed it the same way as I did with the keelson. Now this stick acts as a guide to make sure everything is aligned through the daggerboard case. Well, now I'm mixing up another batch of epoxy, and I'm using a slightly different type of filler that's ideally suited to filling the screw holes. All right, more epoxy, but this time I won't use any fillers. Now the idea is to take this 4-inch fiberglass tape and drape it over every seam and tack it in place with some epoxy. Now you'll notice that the epoxy makes the tape clear. In fact, by the time I get done, you won't even know there's fiberglass tape there. All right, now I'm just going to pour a little line on the tape and using a plastic spatula, just saturate the tape. Now I got to move quickly before this epoxy sets up because there's another piece of tape that goes on top of this one to reinforce the joint. Point here is to work from the corner to the edges, removing any air bubbles. Well, the epoxy is set up overnight, and believe me, it's very hard. It'll even get harder over the next 4 days, so I want to get to taking down any excess. A paint scraper is great for trimming down the putty at the screw holes. On the fiberglass seams, I want to use the scraper to just knock down the edge, just getting rid of the little roughness on the edge. And then I want to turn to my sander and feather all the edges so that they just blend in with the wood. Now that's going to take some time. Now I hand sand the corners so that I don't sand through the fiberglass tape. Now on the prototype it took me about 4.5 hours to sand all the seams, and then I put a coat of epoxy sealer on the entire hull. And let me show you what that results in. The fiberglass tape practically disappears and is very smooth. At this stage the hull is ready for additional coats of epoxy, paint, or varnish.
30 minutes of free calls every month for life. Sprint ahead.
Now I've just formed a couple pieces of 3/4-inch mahogany for some bulkhead stiffeners. This one goes behind the aft bulkhead. The ends are cut at an angle, actually in both directions, to fit against the sides of the bow. There's a notch in the center for a piece we'll put in later, and a little bit of a cutout to allow for the bulkhead access cover. Now this one goes behind the bulkhead. It not only stiffens it, but it gives me a place to attach the deck structure later. Also at the bow I have these stiffeners, except there's two. Again, cut at an angle to fit the sides, and at the other end notch to fit around the daggerboard case. I want to use a little bit of glue and some screws to attach them in place. Here I'm making a couple partial bulkheads. It's a piece of 1/4-inch plywood with a little block on the back side and a stiffener on the other side. And what I have to do is just glue them on and attach them with screws. I've positioned the partial bulkheads halfway between the fore and aft bulkheads, and I have a level that I'm using as a straight edge. And now I'm just going to take some hot glue and tack them in place. Now here I'm mixing another batch of epoxy with some filler in it so that I can bond together 2 thin pieces of plywood. Now this piece that I'm laminating is known as a carlin, and it connects the front, the mid, and aft bulkheads. Drop them in the slots at each bulkhead and bend it to the center. That's the reason I'm using 2 pieces of plywood rather than 1, is because if it was 1/2-inch piece I wouldn't be able to bend it this much. Now a couple screws into the mid bulkhead and I can remove my bar clamp. Now what I'm doing is starting a process known as filleting, where the stern meets the bottom or any side meets the bottom. There's a fairly sharp angle. So by